Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations where we believe if you communicate better, you live better. Is HR your friend or your enemy? That's what we're going to talk about today. As always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Chris. I'm owner of Leadership Potential, working with leaders to navigate difficult conversations and relationships in their cultures. And as always, Lucy is with me.
I'm leadership and emotional intelligence coach and also founder of Mind Fit3 mental fitness gym for leaders, their teams and families. And I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I know because people have really strong opinions about HR. And so I'm excited to have an HR professional with me, with us today, just because I know a little bit about HR just from my time in there, but I don't know everything, surely. Today, we're joined by Amy Pagett, who's an HR leader for over a decade, and she currently owns her own HR consulting company, providing fractional HR leadership and other project-based consulting services. She's passionate about connecting HR to business strategy, and she's a self-proclaimed not warm and fuzzy HR professional. Amy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Tell us about your journey in HR. What led you to even be in HR, and then kind of your journey to this point.
Yeah, so I started my career in HR in recruiting, a staffing firm. You're working for that commission. And so I did that for about 5 years. And during that time, I was getting my MBA. And one of the classes that I was in was sales and Salesforce management. They were talking about how you really needed to understand what motivates your employees, and what motivates employees can be different employee to employee. But in order for you to really maximize their productivity and what they're able to do for the company, you really need to understand that as a leader. And I proposed this project. I'm a little MBA student, and this is what I wanted to do. And they just didn't have any interest, because if they knew what it was that people were after and what kind of demotivated them, it would then create an impetus to change, and they didn't want to change. That, in combination with recruiting being kind of a way to potentially discriminate. It was, we want somebody in their 20s, we want a man, we want them to be good looking. I mean, it was just the menu of what they're looking for. And I thought, that's really insulting as a woman to say, oh my gosh, yeah, this job, there's no way I could hack it. I thought I wanted to be in a position to really make sure that everyone got a fair shake, and that companies wouldn't do this, couldn't do this. And so that really started me on my path in HR. And I became a generalist and moved up from there. And I'm really proud of my generalist background. I love to touch all different aspects of HR. So it's been quite the journey. And then when I laid myself off in my last role, I thought, now's the time to go out on my own. And that's what brings me here. So it's been an absolute blast.
What brings you back to the HR, or what keeps you in the HR field instead of saying, I give up, I'm going to do something else?
Yeah. Well, first, it's the only thing I'm qualified to do. This is all I know. And I think people are fascinating. People are absolutely fascinating. The moments that you have to think, now, what compelled you, of all the things that you could do or say in this moment, to say that, to do that? Like, it really is fascinating to see how that all works and plays out. And I do think there is such a need for HR in companies. And I know there's a bunch of dialogue out there about HR is unnecessary anymore, and we just need to look at leaders in the business, but HR is redundant and da da da. But we're really tapping into and understand the biggest line item in your company. There seems to be an incredible opportunity to dig in there and really understand what it is that helps people be more productive and be more successful and really bring your company forward. And if they knew how to do that, wouldn't they have done it by now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same is true for HR, which is one of my one of my soapboxes, is what are we doing if we're not helping the company move forward? But I do think that HR is needed. I think the idea that we can bring a bunch of people together with all different experiences and backgrounds and opinions into one place and expect them all to just magically get along and row in the same direction, that's ridiculous. So I think it definitely is a needed function in a business, and I am very proud to be a part.
So then, because of your experience, and I love that your focus is on people and just being more effective, what you're on the inside, what are your hot and spicy takes about HR?
Well, I know we're going to get into the HR is or is not your friend commentary, which I'm excited to get into today because I know that that's another dialogue that's been happening out there. I think also I'd like to challenge the idea around authenticity. That I think when authenticity became, one of those hot button sort of bandwagons that everyone's, you got to be authentic, you got to be your true self and all versions of that. Let's just think about that for a minute. If all employees were coming to work and they were being their true and authentic selves, that would be an absolute chaotic nightmare. There would be no rules, there would be no structure, there would be no norms. It was just everybody, it's a free for all. So we're asking people to be authentic, but to be authentic point to a point where it still works. It's still in the framework of the business and being helpful for the business. Yes, be your authentic self, but let's really define what authenticity is in the construct of coming together in a business environment and all working to meet the business goals. So that is one of mine that I know is a very unpopular idea in the HR realm because we love authenticity. Talk about it. Yes, we want you to be yourself when you come to work because that's how you can be your best version of yourself. Well, as long as I agree with what your best version really is, and if your best version is moving the company forward, then yes, be your best version. But if your best version is actually a toxic nightmare, then no, I don't want you to be. So that is one of
Hmm.
mine. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's an interesting nuance because your part of what you're saying, I think, is the idea that it's in the eye of the beholder, like that authenticity. And because even depending on the culture, your authentic behavior might be super welcome and fits in and jives really well with the culture. And in another place, it's super toxic because that's just not how things are done there. I guess, how do you think about or conceptualize that difference and that balance of what's the right amount? And I understand there's no like one right answer across every industry or person, but how do you think about that balance?
I think you have to evaluate whether that authenticity is contributing positively to the business or negatively to the business. And if it's contributing positively to the business, I don't mean that you're just fitting in. I mean, are you bringing a different value, a different idea that is challenging the business and ultimately allows it to grow? Then that authenticity is absolutely welcome, absolutely valuable, even if it might not necessarily fit in with the general culture or the way that things work. So I do think that there's an element of being able to challenge the business and what's always been done that way and those excuses. But if it's ultimately at the detriment of the business, then that authenticity should not be welcome. Now, I say the business as if the business is the North Star, and there's pros and cons, good and bad in every single business. But I think ultimately, if you're a part of something that is intended to add value to the marketplace, to make a profit, or to, if in the nonprofit world, to contribute positively to the cause that you exist to positively contribute to, then great. But if you're not, if you're toxic in the environment, and I think your coworkers and the people that surround you are very telling with that, then I think that no, that's not going to work.
So I imagine that would be a really difficult conversation for any leader who has a team member that has authentic self that is not match with the culture. I assume that might be already addressed during the interview process. But let's say
Yeah,
that was not caught, the disconnect between their authentic, maybe their own culture and the company culture. Maybe we can say it that way. What would you say how to have that conversation? What to do in that situation when there is a mismatch?
you have to focus on behaviors. That this is the behavior, this is the fact, this is the result of that behavior, and here's the impact that it made on the business. And if you explain it in the SBI, I think, framework, the situation, the behavior, the impact, if you explain that in a way that helps them understand what you're evaluating, what you're looking at, that is telling you that maybe this position isn't a fit, this team isn't a fit, this company isn't a fit. And you're looking strictly at the facts. You're not making a judgment on them as a person. You're not talking about their personality. You're simply looking at behaviors. I think that would be the way that I would guide leaders to help address that maybe disconnect.
I'm wondering because the conversation has come up so many times now, both between ourselves when we're chatting and a lot of our clients about working with Gen Z, who seem to be much more vocal about things they don't like or dislike or things they, and I don't mind necessarily in principle, the idea that they're standing up for things that are toxic in the workplace. And it seems to get a lot of leaders stuck in like, now we're just arguing about this over and over again. And it's like maybe even disrespectful. It could be. How are you helping leaders or helping companies navigate those generational communication challenges?
So I think first it's understanding, kind of getting to what's causing the issue, getting to the root of where this is coming from. Because, when you look at the generations, we're motivated similarly, but how it is demonstrated in our environments is very different. So, for example, one of the ones that I always think about is autonomy. Everyone wants autonomy in their work. They want to be able to know that the company believes that they're doing a good job. But how does a company show that? For a Gen X, that's where latchkey kids, that term came from. They want to be left alone. They've been in an environment, they grew up where they had to figure kind of all out on their own. And so when my company leaves me alone, that to me as a Gen X person is the company telling me that I'm doing a good job. Whereas for, it started with the millennials, but certainly with Gen Z, they have been brought up in the world where there is constant feedback. The helicopter parent came up in the millennial generation. And so there's constant feedback. You're doing a good job. You're doing a good job. So if they're not hearing you're doing a good job, then they feel like they're doing a bad job. So here's two different generations. They both want to feel that their company feels that they're doing a good job, but how you demonstrate that to two different generations is the exact and polar opposite. So then imagine if a Gen X is managing a Gen Z, which is how, some of this is coming up is, well, gosh, I've left you alone. Why do you need to hear that you're doing a good job every 5 minutes? So I do think it's understanding the root of it and really having those honest conversations. I think one of the things that Gen Z, that I love about Gen Z, and I like a lot of things about Gen Z, but one of the things that I love about them is that they want that feedback. They want, whether it's constructive or it's positive, they just want feedback. They want it to be regular. They want it to be timely. This is just more of a, the annual performance review is not going to cut it. So increasing communication with this generation about how they're doing, what they're doing, how they can improve, how they can grow in their career. They really crave that. I think also just not making assumptions about them. I think that's another piece of this. I think we all want to be seen as who we really are, not lumped into a group with a bunch of assumptions, misconceptions, stereotypes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think having regular communication is one of those really important pieces with this generation.
Love that. And so back to your idea of authenticity, what would be a better word you would use for it? Because I think you're right. People have co-opted that word to mean all sorts of things. What would be a better phrase in your mind?
That's a great question. I think the idea of being your best self, but under the umbrella of the performance in your role. Because if you're not performing in your role, then what are you doing? If we're not contributing to the business, what are we all doing? So how do you, as an unique individual, a very special snowflake, how do you contribute to the business positively? And how do we make that happen? I think I don't have like a replacement word, but now I'm going to think about it until I come up with one. I'll also let you know.
Then you can have a whole article and book about that.
Gosh, The Authenticity Dilemma by Amy Pagett.
Listen, if you do that, just remember it came up here. We get 5% of proceeds.
Royalties.
Yes. So that's awesome. So what's another hot take you have about HR and its role?
I would say kind of along the same lines, but I certainly, this was born out of my experience in staffing. Culture fit is lazy hiring. It's lazy. You're just looking for another of the same, the same, the same, and you're putting your culture on high, which whether it's good, it's okay, like who knows? Everybody says they have a good culture. What that means is, again, in the eye of the beholder. But if all you're doing is looking for somebody that fits in, then you're leaving a lot of ideas on the table, a lot of challenges that could make the company better. All you're doing is looking for another person that, is part of the popular table in the lunchroom.
So, what would be an opposite of lazy hiring?
Thoughtful hiring. Thoughtful hiring would be that, I'm looking for this person. I'm looking for this hire, and I want them to bring experience from a different industry. I want them to bring, we've only hired, bachelor's degree grads in economics. I want somebody who has graduated from the real life college. The one where I want somebody with the experience and the know-how to know how all of this stuff you read in books actually works in practice. I want somebody who's been a business owner. I want somebody looking for the diversity of thought and what you really, when you think about your business, what gaps you see where it's a lot of the yes people. Let's find a no person, because those no people are the ones that are going to challenge us. And that challenge could mean the difference between we continue on a path and there's a cliff, 3 years up that we don't know about, or we've been able to divert it because we're now thinking differently about different things.
That brings up a thought that it also depends on the culture of the company, who they are looking for. Because some companies or some leaders in those companies, they might be looking for a yes person.
Mm-hmm.
I had a client that she said she was actually an HR leader and she wanted to have the seat at the table to be part of the strategic decision making. Unfortunately, the leaders in that company, they wanted HR to be just to check the box, we have HR.
Oh, yeah.
And so they hired her not to be the opposition, not to bring up new ideas, but to basically just approve whatever they wanted. At least that
Yep.
was the impression.
Yeah.
And so she eventually left the company.
It's important to understand as you're joining a company is what
Mm.
are their true opinions and thoughts of HR in an organization? Are you checking the box, or are you given a seat at the table because they really believe that you should have a seat at the table, or is it obligatory or just to shut you up?
Yeah.
And companies are different with that. I know when I've hired for my team and I've been looking for an HR administrator, HR assistant, I learned early on that the last person I wanted to hire was someone who had an HR background, because I I I don't need someone that is thinking in the HR space. I need someone with finance background. I need somebody who really understands data, who understands organization of data, and making sure that everything is, captured in what we're trying to do. Those minded people are the people that I want sitting in that seat, not an HR person. Because sometimes we're juggling so much that then getting into the weeds and the details, we miss stuff. So I learned that when I would go to different industries, I've been in several industries, I would look for HR people to join my team that specifically did not have industry experience, because I didn't want the recycled people. I didn't want them to bring the same thing that the industry's always done. I wanted an adjacent industry that had some of the same challenges, but when it came to just overarching issues with turnover or morale or those kinds of things, employee relations issues. But I wanted different ideas, and have been able to build some great teams from that. But it did take some doing because I had to convince, the business, no, I need somebody that doesn't know about y'all.
That's such an interesting concept because you're trying, like a lot of people are looking for that culture fit. Like, do you know our way of doing things?
Oh yeah.
And you were like, no, I want somebody that doesn't know specifically what we do, but it's close enough that we can like teach them how to do this. But
Yeah. Oh no, you have acronyms that I don't know. Whatever am I going to do? How could I possibly do HR when I don't know those acronyms? We can learn.
yeah,
It's
Mm.
okay.
Yeah. So that can give hope to those people that, let's say, are thinking about transitioning to a new industry, but one of their obstacle is, well, I don't have experience in that area, in that industry. And based on what you're sharing is that can be actually the benefit that they have, the advantage.
Yes, I would argue we need to be looking for people outside of our industries.
That reminds me of the first hire I made. It was a Gen Z millennial young woman who I had a friend that worked the same company, and she was like, "I don't know why you hired this person. Like, this is not who I would have you expected for you to hire." And sure, she had like a lot of those Gen Z millennial tendencies, but she was the best employee. Coach, super coachable, able to do stuff and like take initiatives and just run with it. And the only worry I had was like she was a young white blonde woman, and we were an organization that was like super diverse, and like that was our hallmark. So I wasn't sure. That was the only thing I was like, I don't know how everybody's going to respond to her, but based on her experiences, I was like, I think you'll at least get this idea. And I had lots of leaders come back and say, "This is a great person you hired. I love her. Let's do more with her." So, like, you're right. Like, it's okay to look outside the normal channels because it can lead to great things.
Right, right. I think the maybe the hurdle to anticipate, especially when you're looking for the diversity and you're hiring for your own gaps. As the leader, you're hiring for your gaps. So I hired someone she was an HR administrator. This was before I learned to hire data people for HR administrator roles.
Mm.
She had an HR background, kind of a different sort of background, but she was really motivated by the relationships with people. And, you mentioned I'm not warm and fuzzy. So I felt like that would be a really great addition to my little tiny department. And I found that because we were so different, we were constantly working on the communication between her and I because I'm like, hi, Dee, let's cut to the chase. We have this amount to do. And she was very much, building rapport and how was your weekend? And there were these conversations that really needed to happen for her in order for her to get to a place where now we can talk about, and we were constantly sort of not evaluating our communication, but we were addressing where I wasn't coming with what she needed or she wasn't coming with what I was needed. So that is something to anticipate as you're hiring for your own gaps, is also be ready to, because you're motivated very differently, you probably communicate very differently. Also, really keeping an eye on that continuing to be effective. It can work, but it does take more work to bridge that gap between communication styles.
I want to make sure we have time for this because I think we've hinted at it a few times now. I want to make sure we really dive into this. Is HR your friend? Or, as I see in lots of online forums and popular opinions, that HR is not your friend. What's your take on that philosophy?
I have a couple thoughts, and I think this is part of the dialogue is when you go into a company, do you think about whether accounting is going to be your friend? Do you think about whether IT is going to be your friend? But somehow we're pigeonholed as a profession that we're either friends or we're not friends. We're either friends or we're enemies. And I think that's a really inappropriate expectation to have of any department in an organization. Um, to assume friendship. And I also have an issue with the idea of friendship because by friendship, it sort of implies a loyalty that I am siding with one over the other when we have been tasked with the almost impossibility of consistently balancing the needs of the company with the needs of the employees. And so to assume that HR is a friend is, I think, it's not the correct assumption to make. Not because we then default to enemies, but because we're a business and we have work to do and we are employees too.
So, how would you describe the relationship between probably the leaders, let's say the CEO and the HR, and the HR and the employees?
I would categorize it as advocates. We can be advocates. We are advocating for the continuation of a profitable and successful business. And we're also advocating for fair treatment of employees. When there's something wrong, we're in a position to say that thing to the CEO that no one is willing to say. And it is our job to say that thing. And one of the ways that I have tackled some of those very difficult things to share with my leaders is, look, I would not be doing my job if I did not say this thing that I'm about to say. And I don't misunderstand. I don't think you're going to be happy with what I have to say, but I need to say it. And then I'm able to say it. And by sort of getting that disclaimer out there into the world, it does help the thing land, because now it's coming from a place of I have this as a responsibility to the company to say this. And I also don't really care whether you like it or not, because it's important to me that I be able to say this and continue to do my job to the best of my ability. So I would say we can be advocates, and we should be advocates. We should think of ourselves as advocates, but our business is our client too, just like employees are.
There's a question also. When you said you are not warm and fuzzy, how would you describe yourself?
Look, I think we can all acknowledge that we don't want to work in a place that absolutely sucks. Creating an environment where people don't hate to come to seems like a decent pursuit. But I think ultimately we all have a role to play in a business. We're not coming together out of the goodness of our hearts and donating our time for free to do all of these things that you've put forth for us to do. We have a job to do. And that job, just like everyone, every department, is to help move the company forward, to help the company meet business objectives. Because if our work isn't doing that, then what on earth are we doing? So I think that's part of the communication piece that we as HR, I think we've, another hot take, unpopular opinion, we've gotten away with being terrible business people as a profession for a long, long time. We've never had to understand the business because we're that, making everyone get along person in the corner that comes in when something bad is happening, and we kind of gloss over it. We go back, we wait in the wings for the next thing to happen. In the meantime, we're just filling out a bunch of paperwork. And that it has been our role. And we've never had to be actually a part of the business. But I think now, and now is the time, but I think it's always been the time, but now is the time to really connect the work we do. Because if people strategy isn't a part of business strategy, I believe that you will not get very far as a business unless you can replace every single person by robots, which doesn't happen. Then go ahead and just tap out. But if your people help you move the company forward, don't you think you would want somebody representing?
I'm curious, how can HR professionals then get better at that aspect of becoming better at that business knowledge and wisdom so that we can become advisors?
Partnerships, internal partnerships with your leaders in finance, in accounting, in IT. Those partnerships are going to be critical, not only for you to understand their contribution to the business and how those departments move the company forward. But look, I don't just default into some finance genius. You look at a Excel spreadsheet and I'm just going to go ahead and exit out of that. That's not where my zone of genius exists, right? But my finance person would be happy to sit down and help me understand how the business works, because he or she, knowing that my HR department knows exactly how their work impacts the business, they're going to come to me with stuff that impacts the business, and they're going to be speaking the language of the business. They're not going to be talking about employee engagement should increase because it's just a really great thing to do. And let's face it, that's been our argument. We can talk about engagement numbers and engagement numbers. They don't care about engagement numbers. They care about how engagement numbers connect to productivity, connect to reduced costs, connect to increased profits, connect to customer satisfaction. So we've got to make those connections for them, because let's face it, they're not going to learn HR. So we need to learn finance, not just enough to be dangerous, enough to speak the language, enough to get our stuff funded so that we can continue to make a positive impact. So I think partnerships are key, and that partnership with your head of finance, head of accounting is, I would argue, one of the most important, most valuable partnerships you could have.
My training as an executive coach, I think, really made me better as a learning and development professional, as a leadership organizational development professional, and because there was such an intense focus on understanding what is the actual outcome of any engagement that we're working on, and like what is the business outcome that we're doing. And it's really about that, and really is understanding what are we doing here. Like we're not just randomly in a training or randomly coaching just to feel better about ourselves. Like there's a purpose to why we're doing all these things.
Absolutely. Connecting, one of the things I looked at in one of my roles is I looked at turnover and I split it up into like tenure. So I looked at turnover in the first 90 days, and on up. And that turnover in the first 90 days was significant. And then I put some dollars to that for every, person in this particular line of the business that we turn over. And I put some very like back of the napkin sort of logic to it, but I put some dollars to it. And that was an initiative that I continued to have a pulse on over the years that I was with that company. And it was one of the metrics that we looked at when we were implementing all of these programs and doing all of these things. We were improving our onboarding, we improving our benefit program. We were improving our employer branding. So we were hiring people that were better connected to our values and how we work, with the idea that if you see that value alignment, you're going to continue to stay with the company. And that 90-day turnover metric was the one that carried through year after year after year, so that we can do all of these things, but ultimately, how is it impacting that? Because that turnover number equated to dollars. And that was the part, of course, the finance guy was like, yeah, let's do that.
You've mentioned partnerships and really being focused on the purpose, why we are here. Now, different people may have different perspectives that can create conflict. What would you say has been the hardest conversation so far that you've had as an HR professional?
The hardest conversation,
Either with a leader or an employee.
I was speaking with a C-level person, and this person was over most of the people in the organization, the way that the business worked. So she had someone that was, closer to the front line, and they did something incredibly inappropriate. And I will spare you the details. You can imagine what that was. And because that person had been with the company for a long, long time, she got caught in the loyalty to that person, that the details of the situation seemingly didn't matter. And it was figuring out that, like, is this rooted in rationale and logic, or is there something that is clouding your judgment? And what is that that's clouding your judgment? And figuring out different ways to say the same thing, but in a way that addressed where the root of this disagreement was. When I was telling her, we need to part ways with this person. There is no coming back for this. And so I think understanding, getting to why someone is saying what they're saying and ferreting that out is a really important skill to have in HR, because people will say a lot of different things to you and out of the blue. Well, I could not believe that I was even having that conversation, because it just seemed like such a no-brainer that this would need to happen. So once we were able to figure out what the root of the problem was, or the root of her argument was, we were able to move forward and make a decision that was the best decision for the business. But I would say ferreting that out was a difficult one, and there was a lot of zigging and zagging to get there.
So it sounds like what was difficult about it the most was the process part of it, and zigzagging and really identifying the reason, the other person's perspective in a way, where they're coming from.
Yes. And coming from a place of, because if I came from a place of judgment, like, I can't believe that you're arguing with me about, like, how on earth, if I came from that place, that would not have gone well. But I approached with curiosity. Help me understand what is getting you to this decision, and just letting her talk. It's amazing the value of shutting up and just letting someone talk. I believe that silence is a really, really important part of communication. Yeah,
True.
so I would say just checking your judgment and your assumptions and instead approaching with curiosity is how we got there.
What supported you to make that switch? Or maybe you weren't even judging, but some people may be, and they might be upset, frustrated. What would you say works for you to calm down and start a conversation from a calm, curious mindset?
It's a great question. There have been situations where I've found myself in a place where I can no longer um, actively listen because I'm too hung up on where we are and why we're there, or my understanding of why we're there. So I've paused the conversation and just taken a step back. I think it's also helpful to just write down, physically write down the facts that you understand. And what you then also write down the things that you don't understand and what gaps in the story that you're missing, so that when you approach the conversation again, or you've done that already, I think it's an important exercise because you sort of have this North Star of exactly what you want to learn out of that conversation. And it provides you a strategy so you don't necessarily get caught up in your own emotion, your own judgment. Instead, you're filling in the blanks on a piece of paper. And that I think allows you to see things a bit clearer.
And do you recommend like a physical piece of paper that people carry with them?
I do. I do. I just don't think that it sinks in the same way if you are typing it out, and we can't rely on our memory. So I think the act of writing it down, you'll also be able to see what pieces of the because we can't write as fast as people talk. So what were the important parts of that conversation that you, because you were forced to write down only the important parts, and those important parts aren't your feelings about it. You don't have time. You're only writing down the facts, the information that was out that person's mouth. Those are the things that made it to the paper, and those are the things that you're then making a decision on what that next step is. So I think in a couple ways, writing it down can be very helpful in seeing something clear.
Sounds like it could also help with shutting up a little bit and being quiet and listening.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it's part of the communication.
And it also helps, okay, a sneaky way, little tip, little hack is if you're struggling to figure out where you want to go next in a conversation, just start writing, because you're writing, it's just say, hang on a second, I'm writing some things down. And it gives you time. It gives you sort of like this pause for you to think about what you're going to say next without you just staring blankly at somebody being like, just a second, I need to come up with the next question.
Genius.
Good
So you
one.
could even be writing like that narrative, like I'm just writing on a piece of paper.
Yep, yep. If it's over Zoom, you could just be doing this. Like they don't know. They don't know what you're writing, but it does help you then figure out what your next move is when you might be stumped for a minute.
Let me write something down real quick.
Yeah.
So I'm also interested in your mindset going into that type of conversation, because for a lot of people, there's that, anxiety or stress or hesitancy when you're speaking that, I don't know if this is the right word, but truth to power, right? You're trying to speak up to somebody in a higher position to you. But what's your mindset going in to give you that confidence to say what you need to say?
Well, first, from a tactical standpoint, I always wear polka dots. Polka dots to me equals power, and I feel better when I'm wearing them. And so I'm going to wear my polka dots on the day I'm having that conversation. Think about what you're presenting and putting out into the world, because it does give you a little bit of a different lens that you're looking at the conversation. I have always felt better going into those difficult conversations with my boss, with another leader, I have a difficult conversation to have with an employee. I've always felt better if I practice and I say those things out loud. I want to hear how it sounds out of my mouth. And it can help me sort of finalize in my mind those key words that I consider landmarks in the conversation. I really liked how that phrase sounds. Doesn't mean that you're memorizing some script, but if you say things a variety of different ways, you will gravitate toward what feels natural and most effective for you. And I have felt 100 times better if I have some idea of the words that I want to say. So I think preparation is key, and also bringing a business case. If you're asking for more money from your boss and you just say, I really feel like I should be getting more of a raise than what you gave me. Well, neat, me too. Now what do we do? Because I'm not going to make a business decision based off of how your feelings. But if you present a business case, I did X, Y, and Z this year. I did some salary benchmarking. Here's what I've come up with. I believe that I should be paid X because of this data. That's actually a business case. Before you were just talking about feelings. Now you've presented data that's difficult to ignore. And then they are armed with the information they need to make a decision that's most beneficial to the business. And if you're a valuable part of the business, then they're, going to do what they can. So I think also that is part of their preparation.
What's coming up for me is you're sharing, let's say, for the employee, how to build a business case for the business. Let's say a situation where employee already is providing a lot of value. They've been working very hard and waiting for promotion. And let's say in the economy situation, there's freeze on salaries and no promotions in that cycle, let's say. Company says because of our situation, we need to pause any promotions, increase it. In this situation, not to lose the valuable employees and keep people motivated, what would you suggest the leaders might do, or what kind of conversations they might have to help people feel better about the situation or keep the employees?
That is definitely a challenge. Let me write something down. No kidding. So I think being very realistic about evaluating the things that you have to offer employees and talking about those in a way that you may or may not have talked about in the past. For example, there's a company that I'm working for one right now where we necessarily didn't share the part of the premium that we were covering for medical insurance. Well, employees don't know that we're covering 2/3 of their premium. Let's put some dollars to that. So while yes, you're getting an increase, or we're not able to give you a raise this round, or whatever, here are the things that we are doing, and we're attempting to be more transparent with you about how the business is run, so that you can then make the best decision for you with all of the facts that we can give you. And understanding their compensation in a different way is a great way to communicate that. Inflation, what's going on in the world right now? Your premiums are increasing. We're not able to give you a raise or promotion right now. Here are all the things that we are doing. Excellent PTO policy, where we give you work from home, hybrid capability. We're paying 2/3 of your medical premiums. We're doing all of these things. And then you allow somebody to make the best decision for themselves. I think as businesses, sometimes we forget that the employees have a choice in the matter too, and they will make the best decision for themselves. And if it's staying with you because you are doing all these things, then wonderful. That's what you want. But if ultimately it is not rising to the level that they need, and they need to get that elsewhere, they absolutely have the choice and freedom to make that decision for themselves too. And we can't be afraid of that as a business, and we can't be handcuffed as a business. We can't be so fearful that we're going to that people are going to leave us, that we are doing things we can't afford, stretching the business to a point where it can't take anymore. We're not actually progressing the business forward because we had to give these raises because we're afraid people are going to leave. That's not good business either. So I think we do need to be realistic about this arrangement. We're actually not a family as much as we want to say we're just like a family. No, we're not. In the end, this is a business relationship. And if we're not both working to positively influence our lives, more profitable company, money to you where you're paid fairly and you feel appreciated and you don't hate to work for us. If that's not happening, then this relationship isn't working. And I think being honest and being able to acknowledge that and say that out loud is okay.
Amy, sometimes, for whatever reason, people may just skip the entire episode and just come to this point, and they just fast forward randomly to right here.
What?
Other than go back and listen to the entire episode, why did you skip this? What are 1 to 2 big takeaways from our conversation today?
I would say challenge the idea or think critically about the idea of authenticity. Don't jump on a bandwagon just because it's something that, it seems like everybody else is doing, really think critically about authenticity and other, ideas that we love to latch on to. HR is not your friend. HR is your advocate. And third would be really value and foster those relationships within your company that help you learn the business better. Because if you're speaking the language of the business, you're able to make the business case to get you the funding you need that will continue to connect to the business strategy and move the business forward.
Powerful.
Done and done.
Done.
Period.
Go listen to the rest of the episode.
Yes.
Amy, let's say somebody's listening and they're like, I got to work with Amy. I got to know more about her. I just want to ask her a question about how to be less warm and fuzzy. How can people reach you and follow you?
Well, if that's your question, then yes, please reach out to me because I love having that conversation. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I am most present. And check out hrinsightconsulting.com. That's my business. I love the work that I do. And so reach out to me there too.
Awesome. Amy, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciated talking to you. It was really a fun conversation.
It was fun. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you, Amy.
Hey, everyone. What a cool episode. It was such a pleasure talking to Amy. We've been trying to schedule this for a long time, but we finally made it happen. You will find some cool things that we talked about that we actually talked about in previous episodes, like how to manage up, like how to negotiate your salary. We'll link those episodes in below so you can also see what we've also said about this before. But also, if you need help managing difficult relationships, difficult conversations, or leading with more emotional intelligence, please reach out to me and Lucy. We're happy to chat. We're happy to talk to you about how we may be able to support you. So reach out. All of our contact information will be below, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.